Mary's because, for one thing, because St. Mary's has the Great Books program, which is focused on, really is an interdisciplinary focus in and of itself. It's focused on shared inquiry, that is, small classes where people talk together, and the faculty person isn't a major authority figure, but is really part of the whole discussion process, very, very Socratic in that way. It also seemed to me to be perfect for St. Mary's in terms of St. Mary's mission, particularly the liberal arts tradition. I always love that phrase that's in the description of the liberal arts as one of the goals is to reawaken the sense of wonder. And I feel that that was, to me, one of the main goals of the Graduate Liberal Studies program also. The dealing with the questions, the essential human questions, also I felt is very much part of the liberal arts tradition and also of Graduate Liberal Studies. It was a faculty development and curriculum development. So the Institute, by using the shared inquiry method in creating the courses, was actually developing the faculty in terms of their own ability to discuss in this methodology, this interdisciplinary methodology. And of course, the other important thing was that an interdisciplinary curriculum was established. And this was a 2-year process that engaged 30 faculty members from across the college, from many different departments and different schools. And they were engaged in talking together, first in small groups of 3 or 4, to develop a particular course. And then we would come together every so often as a whole and in ways talk about how the various courses talk to one another. And so we created a course of study that was very coherent and very much part of a conversation in many ways. And the entire program is interdisciplinary, and each course within itself is interdisciplinary.
So I was put on the team designing the course called The Sacred Ways of Being Religious, which was one of the courses in the core curriculum as we conceived it. One of the first 5 courses that all of the students going through the program would be required to take, even if they ultimately specialized in something else. So, that was a very interesting experience. I worked on a team of 3, along with J.D. Phillips, a mathematician, and Rosemary Graham, an English scholar. And it was quite an interesting experience because I was the only theologian on the team. There was a tendency in the group to defer to me and to think that I was the one who really ought to be designing this course, and my colleagues felt a bit out of their depth. And so there was this whole having to wrestle with what it meant to try to do something that would be interdisciplinary, something that would not simply be a disciplinary investigation of a topic, but something that would try to look at an aspect of human experience through multiple lenses. And so I found in that group they were very collegial and very fun to work with. And I found in that group that the ball kept getting tossed to me, and I would have to keep tossing it back. I mean, I wanted to make my experience, my expertise available to people, but I didn't want it to be the guiding principle of the course. So we had a lot of fun with it. And I think in the end, after I think 4 or 5 months of work, we came to an initial conception of the course that was rather interesting, because we kept struggling with how to design something that would be interdisciplinary and not just fall back into disciplinary categories.
I was involved in the self course and in the creativity course. Both, they were very different designs. As you know, the creativity course had 2 tracks. There was a theoretical track where we read works by artists about what it means to be creative, and mathematicians, not just artists, what it means to be creative. On the one hand. On the other hand, we had the students work on a creativity project, so that they named it at the beginning of the course, and by the end of the course they were to have completed it. And seeing how the readings that we were doing in theory paid off in practice was a really wonderful thing to see the interaction between those two. So the self and the creativity were the two that I helped design.
Let's see who else we were. Paul Gerlanda and I can't remember, one other person was involved in that. We decided to call it Society: Rethinking the American Dream. In other words, is there an American dream? If there is, what is it? And where has it gone? And what we decided to do was to go right back to the very beginning of American society. In fact, predating the Revolution, we first began, the first text was the Iroquois Constitution, which is kind of a later version of an oral document that was heavily influential on the American Constitution. Benjamin Franklin had read it when he was involved in the Treaty of Albany, which was in the 1760s, I think. And he brought a lot of that knowledge of the way societies get along with each other from that document. So that was a very interesting beginning. Then we read the Declaration of Independence, we read the Constitution, we read all kinds of different essays, and then we ended up reading things like Huck Finn and Hemingway's In Our Time. And so we read novels, Whitman, poetry, and we had wonderful discussions because people brought to this examination of our really important texts life experience. And so there's some people were right-wing and some were left and some were up and some were down and some were absolutely convinced there's no such thing as an American dream, and others were waving the flag. So it was a wonderful experience because it brought that life experience to the discussion of the text.
But I think that probing the mystery of existence means to take it, first of all, to understand that it is a mystery to be explored, and that with this graduate liberal studies program, the topics that we chose were generic enough to be mysterious enough that the different disciplines looking at it probed it, nudged it, found connections, found a way to grow within that I think reflects very much the learning style of St. Mary's College, particularly the collegiate seminar.
I always love that phrase that's in the description of the liberal arts as one of the goals is to reawaken the sense of wonder. And I feel that was, to me, one of the main goals of the Graduate Liberal Studies program also. The dealing with the questions, the essential human questions also I felt is very much part of the liberal arts tradition and also of Graduate Liberal Studies, so it seemed to be a perfect fit.
So I got into the program and I just found it delightful. Someone once said that it's St. Mary's best kept secret. And that's what I discovered, that it was the best kept secret in the sense that when I graduated from St. Mary's, I went into the Great Books program, and they talk about how it's supposed to run. But the GLS program was the first time that I had actually seen it the way it's supposed to be run. I could be not only a teacher, but more importantly, a student with the students. And I really cherished that, you know, being able to come together with them in the evening. We always began with an exercise, which I call touching base, what had happened. They could share with each other what had happened to them since they had last met, which at the time I was rather concerned about because I said, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, taking up time to do this. But the students said that that's what brought them together. It formed community among them. It got them to know about each other and what was going on in each other's lives. And then we could get into the texts themselves. And what I discovered was that I didn't have to test them. They did the reading. They did the work. And their life experience was just tremendous.
The program in itself was so well designed. I was just very impressed with the planning and the coordination of the way the classes were put together and then delivered. When I was a student, my class took 2 courses at a time. And the courses were paired in such a way that they enhanced each other, they contrasted with each other. It was a very carefully thought out program.
I think that the word wonder is the correlate to the word mystery, that when we encounter a mystery, it causes us to wonder. It's not like we solve a problem, but we wonder at a mystery. And I think those are 2 different tracks in education. In many well-positioned places, we do in fact try to solve problems in the discipline. But in this one, we want to wonder at mystery. And I think the Graduate Liberal Studies and all the courses that we had were built on that premise, that we were exploring, going through, naming, pointing to, trying to touch mystery, and that was what made it so exciting, because it finally was about touching about the mystery of ourselves.
This program. And what we discovered was that they were people who were midlife, and in some ways it wasn't altogether a surprise. They were people who were in midlife. Quite often they were people who were in some sort of personal or professional transition. Sometimes they were going from one job to another. In some cases, the last of their children had reached college age and had gone off to college, so they were dealing with the empty nest syndrome. In some cases, they had perhaps survived the death of a spouse, or a difficult and painful divorce, or something along those lines. But every single one of them were in a state of transition and personal, to some extent, personal upheaval. Not to a debilitating extent, but in the sense that they were at this point in their lives at which they were reassessing things and thinking about how they wanted to spend the next phase of their lives. So they were people who were particularly open. So I would say from a sort of a developmental point of view, those were the students. They also, the students who benefited the most from the program were students who had a voracious appetite for reading, for writing, for conversation, for the world of ideas.
Always thought about getting a master's. So instead of going out and getting the Harley and riding into the wild winds, I decided to go back to school. And so I enrolled in the GLS, and I guess that's how you could say I handled my midlife crisis.
One group of students that I taught the beginning course, the time course, It's About Time. And it happened to be a class of, I think it was about 14 students, and I think the majority were women, I remember that. And at the very first class, I always have people go around and say, you know, why they wanted to take this program and so on. And I remember being completely impressed with this particular group, that as they went around, each of them said, really in one way or another, that they felt selfish in going to graduate school, selfish in taking this opportunity to do something for themselves. And it struck me that it was just amazing that each of them said this in one way or another. And so I think part of putting them in possession of their own powers was for them to begin to realize that this wasn't a selfish activity, or maybe it was selfish in a good way, but to grow in your own powers, to grow in your own sense of self, to do something for yourself. None of those things are selfish. They're putting you in possession of your powers.
An opportunity to engage with other adults who are on a similar kind of a yearning path, who need something to sink their teeth into, who want to give to each other. I found that I learned from my co-students probably as much as I did from the texts that we used, from the instructors that we had. It was the interaction and the shared inquiry.
Well, you know, part of our mission is focused on the student, and I think the way the program was set up, the readings we did very much focused on them at a time when they could get together, come together to build community, to have a quality education, respect for each other. I think in all those aspects, it reflected the mission of our college, and in a very, very unique way.
Enough. It's About Time was perfect. So they knew it was about time to get into this course of study. I thought it was a great title. Actually, Sally Stamp suggested that title. She was on the design team. And it was a wonderful course in that time is something we deal with constantly, every day, in one way or another. So we looked at time from so many different disciplines, and then also from our own experience of time and how to handle time. So it was a marvelous introduction, and that was probably my favorite course.
The second course that I designed, which was also a lot of fun, that was with Francis Sweeney in the Spanish department, and with Judd Case, who is a biologist. And that course was called Crossing Boundaries, Race, Gender, and Class in the American Experience. And that was a great deal of fun too. We ended up doing all sorts of things in that course to help people wade into all of those topics that are so often topics we don't talk about or try to avoid talking about, topics that some of us sometimes feel uncomfortable with, really trying to wade into all of that and understand what it means to be embodied, to have particularity in a culture in a way that sometimes leads to inclusion in some cases and exclusion in other cases, and what all of that is about in terms of the boundaries that we create and the boundaries that we try to transcend.
There's something about humans, many of us think that we're not creative. I can't draw, I can't sing, I can't write, the different things that we place upon ourselves, and to take the very area where we don't think we are creative and to begin to take steps in it, get the primer on just what it means to study color, what it means to study sound, and it is quite amazing. It's not like the goal had to be a published poem or a work of music that could be performed in public, but by starting where one is and seeing how far you can come in the course of 13 weeks, just beginning to be aware of what creativity is like in yourself as that project. It was amazing to see the self-discovery that went on through those creativity projects.
Students, though, whose ideas were much less well formed and who had not had a very strong connection with a particular instructor. So it would be my job then to help them brainstorm about different ways of taking their interests. We'd often begin by talking about a course that had been a favorite course, an author or a book that had been a favorite for them, and trying to surface why that was a favorite and whether there might not be something in that they might be able to work with in terms of creating a project.
So I kind of took over what's called the Integrating Colloquium, and that was the last class that people take before they do their project. And most of the projects were written, but actually some of them were art projects and others, and they were just wonderful. So it was a combination of honing in and talking about what your project would be. Usually it would be about 6 people, maybe 8 in the class, sometimes as little as 3. And people would bring to the table what they were working on, and we'd all talk about them and critique them and give them help. But then we also focused on what I would call writing texts. And I chose 2 writers, 2 great writers of American English. Hemingway in our time, which is to me one of the great examples of a pure, icily beautiful style. And E.B. White, the person that wrote Charlotte's Web, his essays, which are just hilariously funny and very digressional, and a very, very different style than Hemingway's. And we would read one or other of those. We do very close analysis of that. I mean, really close analysis. Word counts, how many adjectives, how verbs, tenses, all that sort of thing. And then we do exercise it. So I say, okay, so write about your, I don't know, your schoolyard lunchtime in the 3rd grade as if you were Hemingway. And now try it as E.B. White, right? And we had a lot of fun. Whip and the carrot. I used the carrot most of the time, but occasionally the whip. And I remember Stu Sellin, one of the greatest projects I've ever read. He's a professional photographer, a studio photographer. Took on a project of doing photographs of all the East Bay parks and hiking in every one and doing this wonderful sort of history of the parks, etc. But all he kept doing was producing wonderful photographs. And finally I said, Stu, you've got to write something. And he said, oh, I'll get you some pages. And finally I said, Stu, unless I see your hand come through the door with 60 pages of text in it, you're not getting through the door. And he showed up the next week, and the hand came through the door, and it was filled with photographs, and I just got up and I closed the door. And I just shouted through it, come back when you've got something written. And in fact, he came back, and it worked out. Well, it worked out to be one of the best I've ever seen, wonderfully. In fact, it's going to become a book, I think. So.
In the GLS program, they want you to deal with personal issues. And one of the most personal issues that impacted my life was the 1 year I spent in Vietnam. And so I wrote my project based on my time over there as a medic. And it was quite revealing, and it wasn't the easiest thing to write. That project, the process of writing through and remembering some of the incidences that happened to me over there impacted me, and in a way that it was easier to deal with some of those incidents.
The final project had to do with the prehistoric tomb carvings in Ireland. And I had been to Ireland several times before the project, and I was particularly interested in places like Newgrange and Nath, Douth, Carramore, Carrickeel. These are all very famous prehistoric tomb sites in Ireland. And some of them have very elaborate petroglyphs, carvings, spirals, geometric designs, designs that may have something to do with astronomical activity. And it occurred to me that some of the things that we were studying in graduate liberal studies could be directly related to my final project. Society, sacred, creative process, and I was able to weave all of those things together, and I thought I made a fairly successful final project. It was fascinating for me, and it helped me focus my interest in Ireland.
Not only did they come to know us as brothers and our mission, but I find that they became the advocates of this kind of learning wherever they went, and to this day I still keep in contact with them. We've developed, it isn't just a student-teacher relationship, but I really have a sense of working with colleagues, and I call them to encourage them. Often they call me for counseling in various aspects of their life, and it's just a real honor and a privilege, you know, to have been connected with these students. I would have wished to have, I wished I had gotten into the program much earlier. And it was just an extraordinary experience for me, and I lament the fact that the program, you know, was discontinued. I continue the friendships I made with the students there.
Well, its legacy to me is in the what the students, the people who participated in it, have gained from it. I believe that they have gained a broader view of life. They've looked at essential human questions. They've had sort of a personal renaissance, and they've had a sense of wonder about it all awakened. They've brought their own life experiences to it, and they've grown and been able, I think, to move ahead in life as a result of the program, and I think that's its great gift and legacy.
Mm-hmm.